This Flutter app has a slidable button that we can drag to the right to go online, as well as slide back to the left to go offline. Let's code this app from scratch. We start off with a blank VS Code window. The first thing I'll do is open up the folder that I've created specifically for this project. Next, I'll open up the terminal and use the command flutter create demo_app to create a new project in a folder called demo_app. We can see that our project has now been created. So now I'll go to our main.file and change this device to Chrome so that we're able to run this project on our browser. I'll start by changing the title of this app, then I'll remove the comments in this code as well as some of this code so that we remain with only a blank scaffold. The first thing I'll do is create two variables. First being a boolean, which I will call is online, and by default this will be false, and then a background color, which by default will be white. Then I'll set the background color of the scaffold to our background color variable, and inside the body of this scaffold I will put a column whose first child will be a sized box for spacing, after which we will move on to the slide button bar. Here we will use a stack widget, and at the bottom of this stack we will have a centered container whose height will be 45 pixels and whose width will be the screen width, and then in its decoration property we'll give it a border radius of 22.5 to round off both ends, and give it a gradient which starts with amber, then a lighter shade of amber, then finally amber at the bottom. We will use a ternary function to determine what we are going to display on top of this centered colored container. If the boolean is online is false, meaning we are offline, we're going to show a row whose first child will be the widget that is going to be dragged to the right. For this we will use the draggable widget. We will set its axis property to horizontal so that we're able to drag it sideways, and then we'll move to the feedback property, which is the widget that we actually drag across the screen. Here we will have a container widget with a height and width of 45 pixels, and in its decoration property we will give it a radius of 22.5 pixels, which makes it a circle in essence, and we will give it a gradient which is radial with white at the center, which is white 54, a partially transparent shade of white, and black outside. Next we will move on to the child when dragging property, which is the widget that remains at the origin when we start doing the dragging action. And here we'll have a container whose height will be 45, its width will be 45, and we will give it a color which is amber and a border radius of 22.5 to make it a circle. Next we will move on to the data property, which we will use as an identifier for this draggable. This really helps when you have multiple draggable widgets, as you're able to differentiate between them using this property. And for this we're going to have a string that says go online button. Let's now move on to the child property, which is the widget that we see before the dragging starts. For this we'll have a container with a height and width of 45 pixels, and in its decoration property we'll give it a border radius of 22.5 to make it circular, as well as a radial gradient with gray at the center and black on the outside, and we're going to have as its child an icon which is the keyboard arrow right icon in white. Next we will move on to the text section, where we will have a spacer to automatically determine the appropriate space between the two widgets on either side. And then we'll have a centered text widget that says drag to go online with a font weight of 600, after which we will have another spacer, then move on to the destination widget for the draggable widget. Here we will have a drag target widget, and its builder property takes a function that takes three parameters, which are context, accepted, and rejected. If accepted is empty, meaning there's no draggable widget in its vicinity, we're going to show a circle avatar with a radius of 22.5 pixels and a background color of amber, and otherwise that means if we have a draggable widget in the vicinity, we will show a circle avatar that will be black 38, that is partially transparent. Let's now move on to the onWillAccept property, which is where we determine which draggable widgets are acceptable to this drag target. Here we'll have a function that takes a data parameter, which is what we were using as the identifier for the draggable, and if that data parameter is go online button, then that draggable will be acceptable to this drag target. This really helps if you have multiple draggable widgets and you want to be specific about which draggables are acceptable to which drag targets. Next we move on to the onAccept property, which is where we define what happens after we've successfully deposited a draggable into this drag target. Here we're going to have a function that takes a data parameter, and inside this function we'll have a setState function that sets the isOnline boolean to true and changes the background color to a shade of amber. Let's now move on to what we're going to display if we are online, and here we're going to have a row whose first child will be the destination widget for the draggable widget that we are going to use to go offline. Here we will have a drag target widget. Inside the builder property, if accepted is empty, we will return a circle avatar with a radius of 22.5 pixels and a background color with amber. Otherwise, we will have a circle avatar with a radius of 22.5 pixels and a background color of black 38. Let's save for formatting, then move on to the onWillAccept property, where if the data is go offline button, then that draggable will be acceptable to this drag target. And finally, in the onAccept property, we're going to use a setState function to change the value of is online to false and change the background color to white. Let's save for formatting, then move on to the text section, where we will have a spacer followed by a centered text widget that says drag to go offline with a font weight of 600, then a spacer, and then we move on to the widget to be dragged. Here we will have a draggable widget whose axis will be horizontal. Its feedback property will be a container with a height and width of 45 pixels, and it will have a border radius of 22.5 as well as a radial gradient with white 54 at the center and black towards the outside. Its child when dragging will be a container with a height and width of 55 pixels with a color of amber and a border radius of 22.5. Its data property will be a string, which is go offline button. Its child property will be a container with a height and width of 45 pixels and a border radius of 22.5 pixels. It will also have a radial gradient with gray at the center and black towards the outside, and the child of this container will be a centered icon, which is the keyboard arrow left icon in white. Let's now move on to the content of the app, which will be displayed below the slide button bar. Here we're going to use an expanded widget, and for the child property we will use a ternary function that checks the value of the isOnline boolean. If the value of isOnline is false, meaning we are offline, we're going to show a centered text widget that says you are offline with a font size of 22. But if the value of isOnline is true, meaning we are online, we're going to show a centered text widget that says you are online with a font size of 22. We're now done writing our code, so let's save this project and run this app to check it out. Our app has now been built. Let's close this inspector tab, close this debug console, and zoom in on our app window. We can see that our app works as expected. Let me quickly point out the properties of this draggable widget. This widget that you're seeing as I'm dragging, this somewhat transparent widget, is the feedback property of this draggable, and the yellow circle that remained on the far left when I dragged off, that is the child when dragging property. And whatever you're seeing right now, this black circle with the icon at the center is the child property of this draggable. Let me also talk about the drag target widget. This here is the drag target. As you can see right now, it is amber in color because accepted is empty, meaning there's no acceptable draggable in its vicinity. But as soon as I drag this close to that drag target, you can see that its color changes from amber to black, which is somehow transparent, which is black 38. And that is how you build a slide button bar or a draggable button in Flutter. If you have enjoyed this video and found value in it, be sure to give it a thumbs up and share it with someone who might find it useful as well. And if you haven't already, subscribe to this channel with the notifications turned on so that you get notified every time I upload a new video.